Bees had been living in this backyard shed for many years. The homeowners were planning on tearing this shed down, but they wanted the bees that had made their home here for so long to be safe, so they asked me to relocate the colony. I got to work cutting through the wall of the shed to expose the hive. The homeowners said that they had been stung and chased by the bees while mowing the lawn. Since I was using my saw, and the loud noise and vibrations can sometimes agitate the bees, much like a lawnmower, I wore a veil and gloves. However, once I completely removed the wall of the shed, I found a giant hive full of very gentle bees. The bees had built a beautiful hive with comb that was about 8 feet tall, and they filled every inch of space they had. It was amazing to see all they created, and I wanted to preserve as much of it as possible. So I removed my protective gear and started to remove each piece of comb, starting with the bottom. These pieces of comb were full of honey. There was so much honey and it looked so good that I just had to try some. And because each comb can taste different depending on which flowers the bees are foraging from, I had to try another. This piece was a little darker and tasted a bit more rich than the first, but these bees needed their honey more than anyone else, so whatever pieces of honeycomb I removed from the shed would go right back to the bees. There were a lot of bees in this hive, and they had worked really hard to collect food for their colony. In addition to all the honey that they made, this hive was full of a variety of colors and types of pollen. Pollen is the bees' protein source, and honey is their carbohydrate source, and it's pretty amazing to go inside of a hive like this and to see all the work that bees do. So I just kept working to remove each piece of comb from the hive as carefully and as gently as I could. These bees were not trying to sting me at all, and for me, it's just much easier to do this work with less protective gear if the bees will allow it. I did, however, have to wear nitrile gloves for this removal. I cut my finger pretty bad while making breakfast earlier in the day, and these gloves were the best way to keep the wound clean and covered. Any beekeepers watching should know that these gloves are not sting-proof in any way and should not be substituted for beekeeping gloves, but they did help me do my job better on this day. As I removed each piece of comb from the old hive, I broke it into pieces and put it into frames of the new hive. I like to keep the comb in the same orientation that the bees had it in their original hive, which is why you don't see me putting long pieces of comb into each frame in a horizontal manner. Also, this comb was pretty dark, and it was loaded with beautiful pollen and also brood, which let me know that this colony had a healthy queen. Large hive removals like this are often just a lot of careful repetition, removing comb from the old hive and putting it into the new hive. I put the pieces of comb into frames of the new hive using rubber bands to hold it into place. Once the bees are in the new hive, they will attach the comb to the frames with beeswax and chew through the rubber bands and remove them from the hive. You don't see me using too much smoke here yet, because the smoke is used to move bees away from things and also to cover up scent signals that they send one another to communicate. But I wanted these bees to stay on the comb as I worked with it, and for them to go right into the new hive. I also wanted them to be able to easily communicate with one another and for them to act as naturally as possible so that I could help them better and hopefully find their queen. Each piece of comb I removed seemed larger than the one before it, and as I was removing the comb, I was also actively looking for the queen. If I missed her or if she happened to be on one of these pieces, that would probably be okay, and the bees would let me know by going to her in the hive. But that wasn't happening, and all of the bees were still in the walls of the shed, so I didn't think I had her yet. However, it was getting late and the sun was setting quickly, and I was getting nervous that I wouldn't have enough light to look for her, so I just kept working as efficiently as I possibly could. Once I got a lot of the comb out of the hive, I brought it down to a staging area I set up so that I could work with it on ground level and put the comb into the new hive. You can see here that I have nearly the entire hive removed from the wall, but I still hadn't found the queen yet. So I just kept searching and I started scooping up bees. After I removed all of the comb, there were still some bees gathering at the top of the shed where the hive's entrance was, so I gave them some smoke to herd them down. Not finding the queen is always a real possibility, especially with a removal of this size, but I really wanted to find her. So I gave the bees some more time to move down, and I used that time to start cleaning off the remaining comb from the walls. As I was doing that, I noticed that a group of bees was gathering in an area down below and now on the sides of the shed. So I got off my ladder and I started looking for the queen again. As soon as I looked on the side of the shed, I saw her and I got pretty excited. She was a dark and beautiful queen, and I was just so happy to find her. So I put her in a clip to keep her safe, and I put her in the new hive. As soon as I did that, a lot of the bees started to send signals to the other bees telling them where to go. And the bees on the wall started to scurry into the new hive to be with their queen. Then all of a sudden, a mass of bees just started running down the walls of the shed to be with their queen as fast as they could. So I just waited and watched as the sun was setting and it began to get dark. Most of the bees had left the wall, but there were still a ton of bees flying around, and I wasn't going to leave them behind. So I decided to leave the hive overnight to give them more time to move in. And it was a great sign that the bees in the hive were already taking to it and trying to make it their home. So I closed up the hive and I tucked the bees in for the night. I covered the bees, but I left the hive open in many other places so that all of the straggler bees could move in. When I went back the next morning, I took the lid off of the hive and I was thrilled to see that it was full of bees and a lot more had moved in than the day before. I picked up the frame where I left the queen and the queen clip, and both were just covered in bees, so I knew that she was in there and that she was safe. You can see how the bees were caring for their queen and even trying to build comb in the new hive already. But there were still a lot of bees at the top of the old hive where the entrance was. Most of the bees had moved off the wall overnight, which is exactly what I was hoping they would do. But the bees at the top needed a bit more encouragement to move off of the shed and into their home. So I gave the bees at the top some smoke and they started to go into the new hive. This is always one of my favorite parts of any removal, and it just sort of feels like magic. I could have sat there for hours and watched them, but these bees were moving quicker than I thought and I wouldn't have to wait for long. After about 30 minutes, all of the bees moved off of the top of the shed and into the new hive. I think that they were probably happy to be back in their home and with their queen and with their colony. When I felt like I had as many bees as I could get, I gave the remaining bees on the wall just a bit more smoke to help them move into the new hive. Then I put the cover on the hive, and I put some bungee cords around it to help keep it together during transit. I gave the remaining bees just a bit more smoke as a final bit of encouragement to move into the new hive. Then I picked up the hive, and I carried it through the backyard and to my truck. I loaded the hive with all the bees in it into my truck and I drove them home, and it was another great day of saving the bees.